Thank you, Katie. Delighted to be back. Ron, alcoholic. My sobriety date is December 28th, 1985. That's coming up on 36 years, which of course means nothing from the one day at a time point of view, but it does add up to some cumulative sobriety. So I'm going to talk about emotional sobriety tonight, and especially through the lens of step 9. Now, in order to do that, I want to start by telling you that one of the most powerful amends in my recovery was when I divorced my wife. Now, I suppose that surprises some people because, of course, we would all imagine that the whole purpose of amends making in the steps is to restore all relationships. Well, I want to help you see why in this case that was not true, and it may not be true in some of your cases. But first, before I tell you that story, let's set the scene. And for those of you who've been in these sessions before or been in workshops I've done, this part may sound like a repeat because it is. There's so much misunderstanding of what the steps are designed to do. So I want to give you a real quick thumbnail of how I understand the steps and how they work today. I start with step 0. Literally, this shit has got to stop. And I learned that because some of my elders in recovery explained to me that there's language in the big book that talks about you have to be convinced. That's the word they used. You have to be convinced that you are screwed, stuck, off the rails, that there's no good options. Because what I was taught was you cannot possibly get to a step 1, the admission and acceptance of powerlessness, without first understanding that you're cornered, you're trapped, you're done, you're toast. You can't do it anymore. And that is completely consistent with every transformation I've had in recovery, where I've hit bottom with something. And I hit bottom, and finally I can tumble into step 1 and admit that I don't have power sufficient to solve my problem. That is such a hard piece because I really believe I ought to be able to. But step 1 says, sorry, the stuff that needs fixing in you is beyond your ability. Furthermore, as it says in How It Works, for those of you who are aficionados of the how it works, it says, not only can I not fix me, but you can't fix me. And a therapist can't fix me. And a spiritual teacher can't fix me. No mortal human power can fix the problem. Which sets us up for steps 2 and 3, which says, okay, so you're screwed, you're cornered. There is power. It doesn't matter what you believe about power because power doesn't care what you believe about power. It does its thing. If you can find a way to get into alignment with power, and in fact, the language in the big book, and my second sponsor, Sam, reminded me over and over again. It says lack of power. That was our dilemma. So the solution to alcoholism or addiction or all the things that we get stuck with that we find out about in recovery is actually access to power. And it says there is a power. Then 4 and 5, now this is the part that usually surprises people because most of us do 4 and 5 thinking it's an inventory of all our bad behavior. Well, actually, the big book says the purpose of the 4th and 5th step is to find what blocks us off from that power. Step 4 and 5 is designed to help us see what blocks us off from power. So I'm screwed. I don't have power. There is power. How am I blocked off from power? That's the purpose of the inventory work. Then in 6 and 7, we are essentially brought into what I call the letting go steps. Letting go steps are, okay, so if I got no power and I'm blocked off, I've got to have that power help me. 6 and 7 are not self-help steps. They're self-abandonment steps because I can't fix me. I can't find the solution. And that's been true for, as I'll share along the way, far more than just putting alcohol down, which then sets up the amends step, 8 and 9, steps, which I like to refer to as cooperating with the solution. So in 6 and 7, we're looking for and asking for help. And 8 and 9, as we do quote unquote amends work, which we're going to talk about a lot tonight, I am now actively participating in higher powers work with me by working in an amended way with myself. And there's layers that we're going to talk about. 10 then becomes really, for all intents and purposes, an awareness step. It says in the big book, continue to watch for selfishness, anger, etc. But it says something really interesting in step 10 in the big book. It says that our purpose now is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. So the 10th step is not a gotcha step. It's not a step that says I'm a bad human being, bad, wrong. It says, no, the point is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. And then it takes us through literally the processes in 4 and 5, 6 and 7, 8 and 9, and we do that actively. Step 11 is the connection step, meditation. I actually learned, and in my book, I suggest the 11th step after we have done steps 2 and 3. Because the reason is, okay, if I'm going to try and connect to this power, why not start the power connecting step immediately, especially before I jump into the steps? And then, of course, we know step 12, except I don't practice step 12 at all like I once did. Step 12 today is blossoming, thriving. That is, this vessel gets cleaned and cleared by the steps. I blossom. Not because I'm doing the blossoming, but the blossoming is happening through me. And that's what the steps are designed to do. So in the last session, we actually looked at the letting go steps 6 and 7. The one before that, we looked at the inventory steps 4 and 5. And so if you're interested in knowing more about those, you can go back. So we're interested tonight in amends making. And that's step 8 and 9. Literally step 8 says, made a list of all persons we had harmed, became willing to make amends to them all. 9 says, made direct amends to those people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. All right, so that's the baseline stuff. Really early in recovery, there was an old nun who was no longer a nun because she got drunk a lot and got thrown out of her order and then got sober. And Lou said of this step, this idea, amends means first to make things right. And secondly, it means to change or be changed. Okay, so both of those are really important for where we're going tonight. Amend means to make things right, or it means to change or be changed. And I'm going to tell you how I understand that and practice it today. So in steps 4 and 5, we identified what was problematic in us. And if you sat in on that session, what you heard me talk about was what the big book says, which is once we get past the behavior, we're looking for causes and conditions, which we take into 6 and 7. So amending becomes something entirely different than I ever imagined it was. And in fact, I would argue that my experience has been that my amends have been progressive, just like my recovery has been progressive. So let me tell you how I understand this today. So obviously, most of us start in our amends work by just merely admitting and acknowledging that we've done something wrong or that something is wrong. That's the beginning point, is that we make that acknowledgement. And then most of us go about some kinds of apologies, which frankly, I found the apology work to be very fruitful, but it was only a step along the way. Because apologies ultimately aren't about making things right necessarily, and they certainly aren't about changing or being changed. They're merely words I utter that hopefully hold up. Now, I don't know about you, but I have lots of evidence of making lots of apologies, but nothing changing in me, which meant I did it all over again, and again, and again, and again, and again, and again. So clearly it was part of the process, and every one of those apologies was necessary. They helped me hit bottom with things. But the making things right is where it begins to move to another level. Sometimes we hear about people making restitution. So if you've been a thief, you try and make it right by making restitution. Or we deliberately try to repair or remedy something. So here's a really good example. Lots of us, when we were using, and lots of us in recovery, are very neglectful of our loved ones. We routinely overlook their needs. We routinely, literally ignore them at times. So remedying would be making an attempt to be available to them. This is one I practiced with my siblings when I got sober, was I had been so neglectful of them, which was at the root of some of my deep feelings of shame and guilt. And so I made a very deliberate and conscious effort to try and pay attention to them. I actually decided I would begin to spend a lot of time with my nieces and nephews, because there was so much I couldn't make right with my siblings. But I could certainly be a good uncle, except that even in many cases there I failed because I still wasn't changed. I don't know if your experience matches mine, but there have been times when what brought me to my knees in the amends work, and ultimately steps 6 and 7, was that I kept trying and kept failing over and over again, trying to remediate my behavior and failing over and over again. And we don't talk about that in the rooms, in my experience, at least not often enough, because it's like shaming, right? It's like, well, I'm supposed to know better and do better, so I keep screwing up. What the hell does it say about me? And my great fear is that what it says about me is that I'm so broken, I'm so damaged, that I can't even follow the directions in the steps and behave well. Except that AA is not about improving our behavior. Recovery is about being changed. And in many cases, I've been able to remediate with changed actions. And in lots and lots of very painful places, I was unable to do so. What that opened up, though, was living amends. And some of you are familiar with this, I'm sure. Living amends are those practices we do that participate in trying to be different over time. So one of mine, for example, was I was a bit of a petty thief. People's $5 bills would go missing, and sometimes more than that. I was never a major thief. I was a minor, consistent, steady thief, because I never felt like I had enough for the things I needed and wanted, so I just stole from people. Well, I don't know how many people I stole from. I couldn't even list them all because I stole routinely and unconsciously. So somewhere along the way, my living amend became to pay the world back by being a generous tipper. I have no idea where the money got stolen from. So for many, many years now, I have just continued a living amend, which is to continue to be generous in the world to make up for my theft. And it's become very, very helpful because it's like a 10-step practice over and over and over again. And of course, when I feel particularly stingy, I don't know if that happens to you all, but there's those moments where it's like, no, I don't want to. It's like, do it, Ron. And sometimes I can't make myself. It's like, I don't want to. So whatever that is still in me and still not entirely resolved. Another living amend for me today is that I continue fairly regular contact with nieces and nephews just by sending postcards, which turns out to be a really simple thing that really, really matters a lot. And I'm going to do it for a lifetime as my plan. So the living amend is where we just continue to practice it. Now, what this brings us to eventually is when we are changed. So I'm going to use that example of my stinginess and my cheating and my theft. What happened at some point in time was the cumulative effect of all this amends work literally changed my being. I have become at heart generous. I can't tell you where it came from. I didn't do it. It's the cumulative effect of all this attempting over time to be a different human being. And what has happened is The old idea that I would not be taken care of, that there was never enough, that I couldn't trust people in the world to provide, has been altered profoundly in me. I don't believe any of that to be true today. It has been the most amazing change through steps 6 and 7, where a power I do not understand, reinforced by all these attempts and screw ups over the years, has literally changed who I am. I'm generous with my time. I'm generous with my patience. I'm certainly generous financially. And now, I don't want to lie. Like I said, I still have lots of times where I get stingy again. Okay, double down on the practices. Just one more instance of being human. But literally, I'm living an amended life because the stinginess that used to permeate my life, the dishonesty and theft that used to permeate my life, that's gone. It's gone. That's an amended life. I have been profoundly changed. The really cool part is that means I don't have quote unquote amends to make anymore, right? I mean, if you don't lie, you don't cheat, you don't steal, you don't have to make amends for that. But the more important part is I have been made different by it. Here's another really good example. And I have a different relationship to this one, but one of the things I discovered in my recovery that fueled a lot of my compulsive behavior was anxiety. I had chronic anxiety. I mean, I literally discovered that I woke up every day, once I stopped drinking and smoking and drugging, I would wake up each day anxious about the day ahead, afraid that I could not meet the demands of the day. And alcohol, lack of alcohol, lack of tobacco, lack of those things, I mean, I couldn't take the edge off. Well, the amended life for anxiety is to be able to live with either not being influenced by the anxiety, which is my story, I'll tease this out, or literally to no longer be anxious. To have the root of that, the root fears removed from me would eliminate anxiety. But that's a lot of inventory work. That's a lot of step work. That's a lot of recovery work. That's a lot of amends work. Today, what has happened for me is while the anxiety in me is not gone, I still wake many days with a first reaction to the world of, uh-oh. But what has changed profoundly is I'm no longer immobilized by it, and I'm no longer fearful of it. I know that if I get up, go through my practices, take the first action of the day, somehow or another, I will be at this meeting at 7 o'clock tonight, and I didn't wreck any trains today. So I've gained a kind of faith that I didn't have before that I can do this. Not without feelings of anxiety, but without any negative consequences of that. So I have been changed. I'm living an amended life. So the standard I offer up for you all is not just how do you apologize or how do you make it right, make restitution, whatever. Not just living amends, but the step work practiced over time, especially the inventory to find out what blocks me off from these possibilities. The step 6 and step 7 over time, asking repetitively for assistance to be made different. So today we were talking a little bit before the session, and someone who was on this mentioned their character defects. I don't even use the notion of character defects anymore. It's been erased from me. Now, that doesn't mean I don't do bad stuff. That doesn't mean I'm not a jerk sometimes. That doesn't mean I don't run off the rails sometimes. It means that my relationship to myself has been profoundly altered. I don't see myself today as having character defects. I see myself as being utterly human. And as a human, I will routinely make mistakes, hurt people, screw up, run off the rails. So you see, the amending isn't that somehow or another I've been perfected. The amended life for me today is I don't even think of myself as a character defected person. It doesn't exist for me. What does exist for me is an ability to fully own who I am, how I am in any given moment, any given day. I do my written inventory pretty regularly, and to fully own that. So this whole idea of being changed takes on a totally different meaning for me, and hopefully for you. It's not about somehow or another I'm going to stop being a bad actor. It means that the guilt and shame will be removed. It means that I will own it, and I will fix it if I'm able. And in some cases, I can't, in which case I will remain ready to make it right if ever the opportunity presents itself. My first wife, who we split, she left me back in '85, which is what got me sober. So that's a long, long time ago. And my amend to her has been to leave her alone. I remain committed to this day. If she ever finds me or ever wants to talk, I will have that conversation. In the meantime, the best thing I can do is let her be. So this whole idea of having an amended life, let me put this in the context of divorcing my wife, because this is where it got real for me. So when I married her, she had two daughters, Natalie and Brianne, who were 8 and 10. So they became my stepdaughters. And in the simplest terms I can pass on, I was totally inept at trying to be a parent. I was also totally inept at trying to be a husband. And the result of that was that the whole experience was very, very difficult for me. It also turned out that, much to my surprise, when I was 17 years sober, I discovered that I was codependent and a love addict, which is a whole nother thing. That's about relational addictions, things that Al-Anon works with and CODA works with, and SLAA and lots of good therapists and so forth too. So it turns out that what was going on was that I began to emotionally mistreat Natalie and Brianne. The reason that happened wasn't because I didn't know better. And the reason that happened wasn't because I didn't try to do better. And it wasn't that they deserved it. It was that my coping skills were so underdeveloped, and the stress of trying to get my wife's approval was so great that my frustrations and ineptitude came out sideways at those two girls. And it happened over and over and over and over again. And I would talk about it at a meeting, and people would say, well, you just need to do better. What happened to the notion of powerlessness? I was unable to do better. And the more I talked about it, the more I found that I wasn't the only one in the rooms who was emotionally mistreating people. And in some cases, some pretty bad abuse was going on. Turns out I was not alone. Turns out that there's lots of us who think we know better but can't do better. And the root cause of this wasn't that I had an emotional management problem. It's that I had an approval-seeking problem. And that approval-seeking problem goes all the way back to when I was a very little boy. Before I ever found alcohol or tobacco or drugs or food, I was a codependent love addict from the get-go. I had what today we would call an attachment disorder as an infant. And the result of that was I was primed for addiction of some kind or another. So the solution for that is not to stop drinking, although stopping drinking is necessary. It wasn't to stop acting badly, because I couldn't stop acting badly. What happened was I had to go off for inpatient treatment at 17 years sober. Not for alcohol, not for drugs, not for any substances, but because something in me was wrong. It had been twisted. As it says in the 12 and 12, I had been warped by life. And in fact, some of you heard me say, Bill Wilson wrote a letter in 1957 that the purpose of the fourth step is not to find out our misdeeds, but to understand how we had been damaged by life. That's his exact language. I had been damaged by life. That's not a character defect. That's trauma. And I was innocent. It happened to me. There's nobody to blame, no fault to be found. But that trauma, that damage, that warpedness in me was mine to own fully. So what happened, besides working a whole lot of steps on that, was a whole lot of therapy, the inpatient work. I found a trauma therapist because the only way I could find to get at healing that deep damage in me was through trauma therapy, which is something I've talked about in previous sessions and we'll probably continue to talk about. Talk therapy didn't work. 12 steps didn't work. I had to have a kind of professional help that could fix what was deeply broken inside me. Not through any conscious will of my own. I was totally innocent of this. It just happened, which is some of the language we're hearing now today about trauma. It's not what's wrong with us. It's what happened to us. That's where the inventory is supposed to take and where the amends work has to be done. So the solution for trauma is to be de-traumatized. I mean, imagine that. And if you get the proper help and the trauma gets addressed, suddenly all these manifestations go away. So that's what I had to do. Therapy, a whole bunch of 12 steps on the marriage, a whole bunch of 12 steps on the relationships with Natalie and Brianne. The divorce was critical to the solution. It turns out that there was no way I could be in that relationship and not keep reliving my trauma. That's not to blame her at all. I love her to this day. Honestly, if I could figure out how to be married to her, I hope she never hears one of these. It'll probably mess her up. But I mean, I would still seek her out if there was any way it would work. But there's something about that dynamic that turns something on in me that revisits the trauma and things begin to spin out. And so the amend is to leave her be. And beautifully enough, she found a husband she does really well with. They've been married 18 years. What a beautiful outcome. More importantly, Natalie and Brianne have come to me after a lot of trying to clean these things up. And they have told me that I'm a far better dad today, 20 years after splitting from their mom, because I split from their mom. That's a whole different kind of amend. Something about me was able to be made right by getting out of that marriage. So let's be honest. So what did I do? Well, I went out and started dating, looking for the next Mrs. Right. Except that with that damage, anybody want to bet what you find? You don't find Mrs. Right. You just find variations on Mrs. Wrong over and over again. And I did that. And I did more damage because I was still a codependent who was not in recovery. I was still traumatized. I kept picking women to do a problematic dance with, and it continued to go badly. And I made amend after amend after amend, trying to clean that up. But the real amend was inside me. At one point, I was actually in a meeting where I started talking about this. And people got really honest and started talking about the number of divorces they had. It was a really interesting meeting where everybody started telling the truth about how deeply damaged so many of us are in relationship, which we didn't say it earlier on, but a lot of what I've been asked to do with these sessions is talk about relationship recovery. Well, I can't heal a relationship until the garbage inside of me gets healed. I can't fix me and you until this stuff gets addressed. I need a much deeper amend, something to be mended in me, made right in me. And that's step work. That's therapeutic work. So what ended up happening was, much to my amazement, because I never wanted kids, Their mom had to go, and I kept the kids, and I made a commitment to them. That was part of my amended living. I told you I loved you. I have got to see this through. And so for 21 years now, I have been continuing to show up as their dad. Now, let's be clear, showing up is hard for me because I'm a damaged little kid on the inside who's still healing. I'm far better than I've ever been before. Mostly, I'm able to show up for them most all of the time as a kind, generous, loving parent. I have been amended on the inside. That's not because I try and act loving. I got years of proof that trying to act loving is not the solution. Trying to act loving is a brilliant thing if you can do it. But if you can't do it, it just means you've got step work to do and perhaps therapeutic work and perhaps trauma work. Picked up a good Al-Anon recovery along the way, picked up a good coder recovery along the way. And the result of that is that some things in me have been made right. Today, what I say, I started doing this a few years ago, and it made me really uncomfortable. I was speaking at a conference in Norfolk, Virginia. Oh, I don't know. I guess it was 6 or 7 years ago now. And I decided to do my whole Sunday morning talk, not about drinking and being an idiot, but talking about becoming healed. And the hardest thing in the world for me to say that day was to look out at an audience of 600 people and say, I'm not a broken man anymore. I'm a psychologically healthy adult male with an ordinary set of human behaviors, some of which don't serve me well. I was hesitant to talk about it because when you believe that you're damaged deeply, to begin to talk about being a healed human being, a whole human being, a psychologically healthy human being is a very uncomfortable proposition because for so many years, for 50 odd years, my relationship to me was that I was a broken, damaged human being. That's been changed in me as a result of the steps. I'm living an amended life, not as a damaged, broken man, but as a healed, whole, psychologically healthy man. Now, let me be clear. Again, that doesn't mean I don't screw. I'm very human. I make all kinds of bungles. But the shame and the guilt are mostly gone. I've been changed on the inside so I can live an amended life as a healthy adult male. So what's that look like? Well, somewhere along the way, I was talking to Sam, my longtime second sponsor, and we decided we needed to adapt some big book language just for me. And of course, I love it when we customize the big book just for me because it makes me feel very, very unique. And so what we came up with is that I am happily and usefully single. That's a really important statement because the old damaged Ron couldn't be okay by himself and on his own. I needed somebody to validate me. Today, I don't need that so much. Would I be in a relationship? Absolutely. But I'm a happily and usefully single guy today. That is a total remake of my insides. I have outstanding intimate relationships with people in my life. I never had those before. Well, what happens is if you heal the brokenness on the inside, you can be intimate with people in very appropriate ways. Relationships get healed because I got healed. And then amazingly enough, you start attracting these incredibly cool people because whole people attract whole people. Perfect diagnostic. If there are damaged people showing up in my life, I know I'm just carrying more damage. If whole people start showing up, it's shifted inside me. I am at complete peace with my ex-wife. She and I have had family dinners together. Like I say, I still love her to this day, and I see in her how remarkable she is. That is totally healed. I have no damage there anymore. The relationships with my daughters are really pretty remarkable today. Again, not without mistakes. We've had a lot of things we've had to clean up and work through because I did a lot of damage. But today I'm able, when they critique me, to stay whole. I'm living an amended life because there's a wholeness in there that never existed before. I'm no longer dependent on anyone or anything to make me feel okay. That's the heart of codependency. It's the heart of problems with emotional sobriety, is we're looking for the world to validate us and to make us feel okay about ourselves. We do it through relationships, we do it through sex, we do it through jobs, we do it through, every imaginable thing. And as long as I'm walking the world thinking I'm damaged and I need any one of you to undamage me, to tell me that I'm okay, to love me, I'm open to you loving me, but I don't need that today to make things right on the inside. I was taught along the way by one of these outstanding recovery therapists that in the end, the only solution would be between me and higher power, that looking to you for anything was a mistake. That doesn't mean you can't provide into my life. Absolutely you can. But to expect that of you, and this goes all the way back to the expectations inventory we did in the first workshop, is to set things into motion which cause problems. This is the definition of emotional sobriety that Bill Wilson wrote about, where my well-being is no longer dependent on you. That's living an amended life. Do I spin out? Absolutely. Put me in front of a client who says something snarky to me, I have to do my inventory work because I still can get stung by those things. So you see, divorcing my wife was an incredibly important part of the amends work because it led to being an amended human being. So one thing I want to say about that is, because I have profoundly learned that this is not a self-help program because I'm beyond my own self-help, what I now know is that the heart of steps 6 and 7 is that something is going to have to work upon me to change me because I can't change me. I can't suddenly magically just say to myself and believe that I'm a whole human being. I have to live my way into being whole. I can't change that in me. I can improve some of the behaviors perhaps, but the stuff that needs fixing in me, that stuff is going to require some serious spiritual assistance. And some of that has to come for me, therapist. About 5 years ago, I decided I need to go back into therapy, a different kind of therapy than I've ever done before. And my God, how fruitful it's been. I have to admit, it's sort of like, Ron, you're 31 years sober. Do you really need a therapist? And the answer is, yeah, I need a therapist because I got some stuff to work on. And it has been incredibly fruitful. And it's built a really, really great relationship for me with my therapist. So something that I heard a long time ago that didn't make sense to me when I heard it. It was actually one of the founders of the Adult Children of Alcoholics movement. I actually came in through ACOA and Al-Anon before I found out I needed to stop drinking. So that was foundational. And I heard at a conference, one of the founders of that movement say this: if we do this work, our situations and options move from bad to good situations and options. And then they become good and good options. And then they become better and better options. And that never stops. That never, what an incredibly powerful promise. That the nature of the steps is progressive. The restoration goes on forever. The amending inside of us never stops. We're never going to stop getting made more whole. It will get better and better relationships, better and better. And at the time, I just thought that was some standard grade recovery BS, right? You hear people say that stuff, like, oh, that's crap. Well, it turns out it's true. If I can continue this step-based recovery, and there's other things that work too. Better and better becomes my option, which is an incredibly cool thing, which means that it makes it possible to have a life larger than I ever imagined possible. A life larger than I ever imagined possible. Now, the guy who thought he was damaged beyond repair could never imagine a larger life, couldn't find a larger life, because a damaged guy can't have a larger life. A whole guy can find a larger life. A whole guy can find contentment. I was chronically discontented for years in recovery because there was something deep down inside me that needed to be amended. And today, most of the time, I'm pretty contented, or at least appropriately contented for most circumstances, not without continuing 10-step work. So here's what I will share with you to wrap up my share. And then we'll see what kind of questions you have. And so one of the fun parts is to see what this has stirred up in people. And of course, I think Katie, at that point, we stopped recording so that people can speak freely if they so desire. But I lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico for a number of years, from 5 years sober to, how long was it? Almost 25 years sober. And there was a woman there, she's passed now, but her name was Julia, and she used to run central office. And I periodically would go do service work at central office. And I was talking to Julia one day. She was a very wise woman. You all know what I'm talking about, not just someone who hasn't drunk and hasn't died, but the people who've really done something and have really been changed by recovery in profound ways. Julia was like that, or at least that's how I imagined her to be. And she too wasn't without challenges in her life, but she had done some really, really, really good recovery work that I really admired. So one day we're sitting there, and I don't remember what it was I said that got this started, but I remember her looking at me and she goes, "Ron, AA is not a safe haven. It is a launching pad. AA is not a safe haven. It is a launching pad for you to become whatever, to realize one's potential, to be made whole, to heal, to find your way to things that are satisfying and gratifying, to find some kind of contentment. Not without challenges. Please don't mishear me. There are lots and lots of challenges in the world. We're living in the times right now. But somehow or another, to get out of my desire to merely live small and live in my Barca lounger, right? For many, many years, I thought the whole point was to just stay out of harm's way. I don't believe that anymore today. I have been launched by these steps, by this progressive process over time, and I have been transformed by the process. So let me just say a word about that, just to be really, really honest. I felt it as soon as I said it. There's this fear now that I've said I'm a whole human being, the little voice that goes, "Oh, crap, Ron, you just set yourself up for the fall." Well, that's an old critic's voice. And by admitting to you that I still have a critic's voice that wants to keep me small, that wants me to remain frightened, that wants me to return to being damaged, because it's a very, very familiar place for many, many years. By admitting to you that my response to saying that was to fear that I have misrepresented myself, that I've overstepped the bounds of what's reasonable and sensible, that I've set myself up for the fall, that's what it is for me today to be emotionally healthy. And it almost makes me cry to say that, to imagine that I could be so honest with you all, that that's what's going on for me, and to not fear that you will judge me for it. That's like the most amazing thing for someone who used to spend his life hiding in doorways and so forth, because the world was such a frightening place for me. So I want to go back to that, and then I will stop and we will see what kinds of questions or comments people have, and Katie can run the show from there. AA is not merely a safe haven. It is a launching pad. That's a promise I offer to you, and I would encourage you to see just what you can launch yourself into. So thank you so much for listening. I've never told this story that way. Thank you for the opportunity to do it, and let's see where we go with it.